wonderful people. For today's video, I'm going to do a bit of a compare and contrast between anime and manga, listing the pros and cons of anime versus the pros and cons of manga. So we'll start off first with anime pros. Well, first of all, everything is in color. Another is that everything's fast-paced. What I mean is, whereas in the manga, to see like a character move, you have to read, down to each panel. But in anime, everything's just happening at once. It's like every second the character's moving and doing stuff. Another pro is you actually hear the voices of the characters. You hear them talking to you. You just have to like listen to an anime. You don't have to read it like in a manga, unless you're watching like subbed anime, which people do. Not everyone watch dubbed anime because not everyone likes dubs, but which in itself could be a pro and a con depending on you. I feel like it's not that much of a con, having to read subtitles, because most people who watch subbed anime are pretty good at going like, okay, I can read the subs and watch the anime, read the subs, watch the anime. They can multitask, Another pro is that sometimes one single episode of an anime can equal up to about 1 to 3 chapters within the manga, so you're actually getting the story at a much faster pace with some series. Another pro is that there are some series that are just simply anime series. There is no manga. There are some series that start off anime first and then are later on down the road adapted into manga, like Samurai Champloo and Wolf's Rain. Now, on to the anime cons. Now, this con doesn't apply to all anime, but it can typically be associated with most anime, and that's the fact is that anime that are based off of manga usually only cover anywhere between maybe 1/5 to maybe half of the manga's plot. So you end up having to read the manga to experience the rest of the story. Examples: Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicles, Medaka Box, as well as Dead Man Wonderland. There are exceptions to this with like series like Bleach, which covers like 80% of the manga's plot. I mean, the anime literally stops before the final arc. Same thing can be said about Katekyo Hitman Reborn. The anime ends like on the 3rd to last arc. But there are also some series that cover the entire like manga's plot, maybe with some differences. Example would be like Black Cat. And then there are series like Full Metal Alchemist or Soul Eater, which part of the story is based off the manga's plot, but the rest of it's kind of like an anime original, completely different from the rest of the manga's plot. I believe most people will say like the biggest con of an anime are anime fillers. Some people like them, some people don't. Personally, I don't mind them. Sometimes I do. I'll skip over them if it's like, oh, I can obviously tell this is a filler episode, because there's certain key signs to a filler episode. It's pretty obvious like, oh, that's definitely a filler episode, because some series like Bleach kind of just threw filler episodes in here and there, so it's kind of like you can tell. It's like, oh, you're in the middle of like a huge arc and they just threw in this tinier arc within it, so it's like obviously this entire thing is like a filler arc. So I've talked about it before and I understand why anime fillers exist, but it does frustrate you to a certain point where it's like, I just want to get back to the main plot already. On the flip side to that, another con is that anime don't necessarily just add stuff, they do take stuff out too. For example, in Dead Man Wonderland, there are a couple characters that appear in the manga that don't make an appearance at all in the anime. Another con is that series that are adapted into anime are usually of the Japanese variety. What I mean is stuff like manhwa, Korean comics, or manhua, Chinese comics, are rarely ever adapted into anime. There probably are some cases, I just don't know of any. And side note, I apologize for my horrible pronunciation. And a final con is that not every series is adapted into an anime. There are some amazing series out there that you might not experience because you're like, oh, I'm not really into manga, I'll just wait for the anime adaptation to come out. There are some series that don't ever, get an animated adaptation, and there's some that just, even if they do, it's like well after the fact. It's like this entire time you could be experiencing this amazing series, but you've missed out because you've been waiting on the anime the entire time. But that's not always the case. There's some series where the anime comes out pretty quickly, because it's like, oh, the manga's kind of gotten popular, so the anime comes out pretty quickly too. So like I said, it's a case-by-case basis. Now, moving on to the manga pros. One big pro to reading a manga is that you get to control the pacing. What I mean is, whereas in an anime, say like you missed something because you looked away, or you missed some dialogue so you have to rewind it, find the right spot, yada yada, just to find what you missed. With the manga, you can go as slow or as fast as you want to, whether you want to like whoa, I didn't really understand what they said there, let me go back to this page, okay, now I can come back to this page, okay, now that I understand that a bit better, as well as it gives you time to be like, okay, I can check out the background, ooh, this happened in the background, I didn't notice that before, as well as, if you want to, you can go fast too, just to like, you can kind of just go, okay, done reading, done reading, done reading. You know, it tailors to how you read. Whether you're a fast reader or a slow reader, it's not affected, you know, necessarily when you're reading a manga, but it might affect you when you're watching an anime, especially if you're watching a supplement. Another pro is that if the manga is the original material, it will always tell like the full story. Now the next pro could also be a con, it just depends on you, and that is the fact is that you read manga. Now personally, I'm not really big into reading, but I do make an exception for manga. It's like, okay, I'll suffer through reading this amazing manga. It's like, oh, you can say the same thing about reading, but it's just, to me, I separate them. Reading a manga is a lot different from reading a book. For one, there's pictures, and it gives you something visual to look at. Now along those lines, another thing that could be a pro or con is the fact is that manga are read from right to left. That might not be something people are like, especially if you're not used to it, it will confuse you, and it might make it a little, like, you might just not really even try with a manga because you're like, oh, that's so confusing. But I mean, I feel like it's something people pick up pretty quickly, so it's not that much of a con. So, but that only applies to manga, because manhwa, you know, Korean comics, are actually, you know, read like typical books from left to right. Not really sure about manhwa, Chinese comics though. Now, moving on to manga cons. Now, one big noticeable con is that manga are in black and white. There are occasions where you see pages, like, you know, anywhere between 1 to a few pages are colored, but that doesn't happen very often. It happens every so often because it's like, oh, to reward the readers for supporting the series. It's like, oh yeah, here's a color page or so. There are exceptions to this when it comes to webtoon manhwa, like Noblesse, Tower of God, or Soul Cartel, which are fully colored. Another con, earlier I mentioned that if the manga is the original material, it will cover the entire story, obviously. Well, the reason I said if is because there are instances where a manga is actually an adaptation of another original material, which in those cases the manga doesn't always cover the full story either. Examples like Is This a Zombie or High School D by D, who were originally light novels before they were adapted into manga or anime. There are also visual novel series like Shingetsutan Tsukuhime. I had to look at that because I cannot remember that series off the top of my head. And then there are also video games like Persona 3 and 4. In these cases, you have to read/play the original material to get the whole story. Now, another obvious con to manga is the fact is that it's the opposite of an anime. It's not live, so there's no like seeing the characters move, because in a manga you see them move by panel, whereas in anime everything's just like moving all at once. Like I said, plus you get to hear the characters' voices. Now before you, I've listed all I believe to be pros and cons to, you know, anime and manga. You may agree with some, you may disagree with all of it. You might be like, oh, you missed some stuff here and there, but you know, these are just some of the pros and cons that, you know, I've noticed with my experience. Now when it comes to anime and manga, which do I prefer? For the longest time, I always preferred anime because I didn't even really know about the manga aspect of things. I always thought everything just came in anime format. But then when I did finally find out about manga, I usually only picked them up when I found out it's like, okay, this series the anime doesn't cover the entire story. So I'm really curious to see what happens in the story, what happens to these characters. So I'd always pick up the manga like roughly around the same place the anime ends. But as of lately, I have a tendency to either like, most times start with the manga and like maybe watch the anime later, or not even watch the anime at all. Like examples, Medaka Box and Princess Resurrection, I actually started with the mangas first and then later on watched the animes. But even to that point, I haven't even watched that much of the animes. Like Princess Resurrection, I maybe watched 20 out of the 26 episodes, and for Medaka Box, I've only seen like 2 so far. Not that the animes are bad or anything, it's just it's like I have that preference over like manga over anime now. There are also other exceptions where I've started with the anime and I'm continuing all the way through, like for instance One Piece, Detective Conan, and Fairy Tail. Like I don't really ever plan to read the manga because I feel like with those type of series they may cover the entire manga's plot, because I feel like, you know, that's at least where Naruto is going, since like the manga's already ended. I feel like at this point they can cover the entire series. My question to you is, when it comes to anime and manga, which one do you prefer? And which is your favorite series? For me, when it comes to anime, hands down, it's probably One Piece. I love that series to death. It's just amazing. In my head, people might be like, oh, it's overrated at this point. I've actually heard people say that, but it's like, whatever, it has a special place in my heart. Probably manga wise, even though it's not really a manga, it's actually a manhwa, more specific, a webtoon manhwa that has to be probably Tower of God is my favorite. Like, that's a really amazing series. That's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Like always, till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.